The bloody civil war in Syria took an even more ominous turn this week, with the reports the Assad regime has prepared and might use chemical weapons against rebel forces. Joining us now is Michael Oren, Israel's ambassador to the U.S. And Ambassador, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Always good to be here. Thank you, Chris.
There's a report in the Sunday Times of London that Israel has spotters on the ground inside Syria. What is your latest intelligence about Assad preparing, possibly getting ready to use chemical weapons? Is he still mixing the sarin gas that we saw signs of this last week, or have the warnings from the President and Secretary of State Clinton scared him off?
Well, we're watching this situation very carefully, Chris. We've been watching it for many months now. It's not new to us. Syria has a very varied, deep chemical weapons program. It's geographically dispersed as well. And were those weapons to pass into the wrong hands, into Hezbollah's hands, for example, that would be a game changer for us.
And at this point, any signs as to whether he is continuing to mix the sarin gas or whether he's pulled back from that?
Well, I can't confirm those reports, but I can say again that we're watching it. And I will tell you that we have a very clear red line about those chemical weapons passing into the wrong hands. Can you imagine if Hezbollah, with its 70,000 rockets, would get its hands on chemical weapons that could kill thousands of people?
Well, let's talk about that. The U.S. drew a red line this week, and their red line is different than Israel's. Their red line is if Assad uses them against his own people. Israel's line, as you say, is if Assad were to lose control or give the weapons to extremists, which raises the question, how big a presence do jihadists, and especially those allied to al-Qaeda, play in the rebels who are opposing and fighting Assad in Syria?
Well, we support the President's red line as well. You should know, and Prime Minister Netanyahu has come out publicly and supported President Obama's red lines regarding the use of chemical weapons in Syria. The jihadi presence is big and getting bigger. And the longer the conflict goes on there, the bigger it will get.
Do you worry about the possibility, you lose Assad, who's somebody that's no friend of Israel, but on the other hand, you then get a situation where you have al-Qaeda factions running part of Syria?
Well, we've long advocated for Bashar al-Assad's departure, long before actually the outbreak of hostilities there. We came to the administration years ago and said Bashar al-Assad is too reckless. His father was, you remember Hafez? He was reckless but somehow predictable, reckless but somehow responsible. His son is reckless and irresponsible and ruthless. And he has provided 70,000 rockets to Hezbollah in Lebanon, tens of thousands of rockets to terrorists everywhere. He had tried to create a military nuclear facility secretly. You know, Hafez al-Assad probably never would have done something like that. So he had to go. He was a loose cannon throughout the whole region, in danger to the entire region. If he goes now, we would view that as a very positive development. He is an ally of Iran. He's an ally of Hezbollah. We understand that if jihadists were to come in, it wouldn't be good, but it perhaps wouldn't be as bad as the current situation.
All right, let's turn to Egypt, where Egyptian President Morsi this weekend has rescinded, it appears, most of a decree that gave him sweeping powers, but he is moving ahead with a referendum next weekend on a new constitution. Does Israel care whether Egypt becomes an Islamic state?
Well, Egypt's stability and democracy in Egypt is very important to us. Israel has an interest in a stable, peaceful, and democratic Egypt. We're not going to get involved in the internal politics of Egypt, just like we don't expect the Egyptians to get involved in our internal politics. We think that Egypt needs stability in order to revive its economy, and Egypt needs peace. It's not just an Israeli interest, it's an Egyptian interest, it's a regional interest. We think it's a global interest, the Egyptian-Israeli peace, and we hope that Egypt overcomes its internal difficulties as quickly and as peacefully as possible.
Does your government, at this point, given particularly his role in helping to broker the ceasefire with Gaza, with Hamas in Gaza, do you trust Morsi to keep the peace with Israel?
Well, he has said repeatedly to Americans and others who have visited Egypt that he has every intention of upholding the peace. And yes, he did play a constructive role in helping to achieve a ceasefire surrounding the recent fighting in Gaza. And we hope that Egypt will continue to play that kind of constructive role in the future.
Immediately after the Palestinians, a week or so ago, were voted non-member observer status as a state, non-member observer state status in the United Nations, your government, Prime Minister Netanyahu, announced that it will go ahead with plans at this point, just plans, for a new settlement on the West Bank called E1, and we're going to put up a map and show it. Here's a map of the project, which the Obama administration says would drive a wedge into the heart of the Palestinian West Bank, possibly cut off East Jerusalem from the rest of the West Bank. And my question, I guess, is, will Israel develop that little chunk, E1, or are you using that as a bargaining chip to say to the Palestinians, look, you make trouble for us in the UN and international bodies, this is what we may do. If you don't, maybe we won't.
Well, the map is a little bit misleading. What you saw, that little yellow chunk there, that is actually a suburb called Ma'ale Adumim. 40,000 Israelis live there. It's about it's less than 2-mile stretch of barren desert road from that suburb to Jerusalem. That's E1, that's the road. And we have to worry about a situation in the future where Ma'ale Adumim, that suburb, could be cut off from Jerusalem. Now, as you see on the map, it doesn't cut off the West Bank. You can get from Ramallah in the north, the Palestinian city of Ramallah in the north, to the Palestinian of Bethlehem in the south by going around E1. And if there's true peace between us and the Palestinians, the problem is very simply solved by a clover leaf or a tunnel going under the road that links Ma'ale Adumim with Jerusalem. But yes, I think you said it best, Chris. It was the way that the Israeli government set down a marker. The Palestinians violated their agreements with us and with the United States by going unilaterally to the UN to declare a state. All of our agreements say there's no alternative to direct talks between us and the Palestinians. We're still ready to have those talks. We're ready to have them today if the Palestinians join us at the table. If not, we're going to have to take measures that are going to enable us to defend ourselves and our citizens in the future.
Well, I just want to button up this issue of E1, which is, you know, you put your spin on it. The U.S., it talks about it driving a wedge into the West Bank and making it more difficult to have a viable, contiguous state. The question is Israel necessarily going to build on E1, or are you saying it depends?
Well, I think it's a preliminary stage that was announced last week. It could take years to fulfill that. Let's see if the Palestinians come back to the negotiating table. And I just want to reiterate, we're ready to negotiate today here in Washington and Ramallah or Jerusalem to work out all of the core issues between us. One of those issues is Jerusalem and the question of settlements, which are, for us, part of the territorial issue. We're willing to talk about all of it if we can just get the Palestinians to sit with us.
All right. Well, I want to talk about a different negotiation with the Palestinians, not over the final solution, but the ceasefire in Gaza. A couple of weeks ago, Israel agreed to the ceasefire and, through Egypt, agreed to talks to try to settle the issues. They want a loosening of the blockade. You just want to stop weapons being smuggled into Gaza, missiles that end up being fired on Israel. Two questions. Where do those talks stand, and what do you make of the remarks of Hamas's political leader, Khaled Meshal, who this weekend said he will never recognize Israel's right to exist?
Well, about the talks, Chris, they are going on right now, almost literally as we're speaking, and we're working out various issues. The most important issue from our perspective is stopping the flow of Iranian missiles and other weapons into Gaza.
And has there been any progress on that?
We're discussing this openly with the Egyptians, and it's key, because that's where the bottleneck is. Most of these weapons, whether they come from the Libyan direction or from the Sudanese direction, passed at some point through Egyptian territory into Gaza. So if we can stop that, we can do a tremendous amount toward reinforcing the ceasefire. Khaled Mashal, the head of Hamas, was in Gaza this weekend, and he talked about destroying the Jewish state. There's no chance for negotiation. We're going to liberate Tel Aviv. We're going to liberate Haifa. And he did it in front of this huge papier-mâché model of a rocket. And I think there's no better indicator of what we're dealing with Hamas than that speech by Khaled Mashal.
Ambassador Oren, thank you so much for coming in. We will continue to monitor the developments in the region. Thanks again.
Thank you.